8 meters underground, in the middle of a war, there was a kitchen making breakfast. And a kitchen was the least of it. A working hospital, a printing press, an ordnance factory repurposing American bombs, a buried tank rewired as a command post, an underground theater, and a drainage system that defeated every flooding attempt the United States Army tried. 7 things below the surface of Quang Nam Province that had no business existing, beneath the feet of 30,000 American troops who were looking for them and couldn't find them. You are one of those Americans. One of the 100 men in country at any given time whose job is to go underground and find out what's there. They called you a tunnel rat. Your flashlight is held away from your body. Week 1. First lesson. A flashlight held against your chest makes you the target. The beam moves ahead through 3 feet of absolute black. Then you smell something. Not earth. Not mold. Cooking. This is where the 7 things start. The Cu Chi tunnel network ran roughly 250 kilometers at its peak. A 200-mile labyrinth, as Mangold and Pennycate described it, threading through 3 levels at its deepest point 8 to 12 meters underground. By the height of the war, roughly 5,000 to 7,000 fighters lived inside it. The tunnel rats sent to clear it numbered never more than 100 in country at once. 700 total across the entire war. Of those 700, 36 were killed and 200 wounded. 1 in 3. They went in with a flashlight, a .45 pistol, and a knife. The flashlight was held away from the body. The pistol was used over the rifle because the rifle could not be turned around in the space available. A knife had no sound. These were the 3 facts of the job, and the men who understood all 3 of them before they went in were the ones who came out. Captain Herbert Thornton, the 1st Infantry Division officer who formed the first tunnel teams, described what the job required. An inquisitive mind, a lot of guts, and a lot of real moxie in knowing what to touch and what not to touch to stay alive. Harold Roper, who went down in 1966, said it more plainly. I felt more fear than I've ever come close to feeling before or since. The first thing they found was this. Someone had solved the most basic survival problem of underground life so completely that the Americans never found the solution until the war was over. The problem was smoke. A fire underground produces smoke, and smoke rises American reconnaissance could spot a cooking fire in the jungle, the way a lighthouse spots fog. The Viet Cong needed hot food. Hot food meant fire. Fire meant discovery. That chain should have been unbreakable. A Division 308 cook named Hoang Cam broke it. His invention, developed between 1951 and 1952, and formally named in October of that year, was a buried stove system that routed smoke through a long underground channel before releasing it from a diffusion point hundreds of yards away from the kitchen. Dispersed beneath leaves and undergrowth until it was indistinguishable from morning mist. The Vietnamese army motto associated with it, walk without traces, cook without smoke, speak without sound. It was proven at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, where French reconnaissance aircraft flew over cooking fires that weren't there. By the time American planes were doing the same job, the Hoang Cam stove had been in production for over a decade. Hoang Cam died in 1996. His stove is still standard issue in the Vietnamese People's Army today. General Vo Nguyen Giap wrote of the stove in his memoirs. It would have been a shortcoming if I did not mention here an initiative which improved the life and health of our soldiers on battlefields. That is, a general describing a kitchen stove as a significant contribution to military victory. He was right. The Americans spent a fortune on aerial reconnaissance and infrared detection. A Division 308 chef had already neutralized both. The stove solved the smell from above. The water problem came from below. Water is coming in. Not a slow seep, a wall of water pumped from hoses fed by a tanker truck on the surface. The Americans found a tunnel entrance and now they are sending the river in after you. The passage narrows around you. You can hear it getting closer. It stops. The drainage holes, cut every 20 to 30 meters along the tunnel floor, have already routed the water away. Mangold and Pennycate document the system on page 76. Every 20 or 30 meters, the tunnelers dug a water drainage hole to prevent flooding. The deepest level drained to the Saigon River itself. One of the first things American commanders tried was flooding. If you cannot bomb them out, and you cannot gas them out, and you cannot smoke them out, you pump water in. The tunnels ran underground below the water table in some sections, through a landscape crisscrossed by rivers and monsoon season flooding. The logic was sound. What the commanders didn't know was that the tunnel network had a drainage architecture designed to defeat this exact strategy. Mangold and Pennycate documented specifically. Every 20 or 30 meters, the tunnelers dug a water drainage hole to prevent flooding. The deepest level of the tunnels drained to the Saigon River. In the wet season, when the surface flooded, the tunnels ran dry. Wells went down to underground aquifers providing drinking water independent of surface contamination. The Americans tried pumping in water laced with chemical tracers. The drainage system dispersed the tracers before they could be traced. The Americans tried CS tear gas. The ventilation shafts vented it before it reached the living chambers. The system was not complex in any individual piece. It was thorough. Every strategy that should have worked had a designed answer already built into the tunnels. Flooding stopped not because the Americans gave up, but because the water ran through the drainage holes and into the river before it could reach the living chambers. An army that lived underground needed to understand water better than the army trying to drown it out. The engineering of the drainage system was ahead of the engineering of the attack. They were alive and dry. Armed was another problem, a problem the Americans themselves had already solved for them. You find the shell by the sound before you find it by sight. A hollow knock as your knee hits something that isn't dirt. You bring the flashlight around. A 155mm artillery round, dud, half embedded in the tunnel floor. Someone has scratched a mark on the casing. The mark means it's already been cataloged. Up to 30% of American ordnance dropped on Vietnam failed to detonate. A figure consistent across multiple analyses, including an Al Jazeera review that put the figure at roughly 1/3 of the 7.5 million tons dropped. That number is staggering by itself. What the VC did with it was stranger. Workshops operating by lamplight, deep in the tunnels, cut open dud American shells by hand, drained the unexploded powder, and repurposed both the explosive and the casing. 155mm rounds became anti-personnel mines. Bombs became booby traps. A weapon that failed to kill for America was rebuilt to kill Americans instead. The National Museum of the U.S. Army has the field notes. Collect the unexploded bombs, cut them open by hand, drain the explosive powder, and reuse it in their own booby traps. The guerrillas who died from American firepower were, in a real and documented sense, being killed by their own side's manufacturing defects. The tunnel rats who found these workshops brought back the shells as evidence. American commanders received after-action reports documenting the ordnance recycling. The supply of raw material never ran out, because as long as American aircraft were bombing, a percentage of those bombs would be duds, and the workshops below would collect them the next morning. The workshops made weapons. Other rooms underground made something the weapons couldn't reach. You find the room by what you hear before you see it. Not a voice. A mechanical regularity in the silence. The ghost of something that was running recently and isn't now. Your flashlight finds iron. A printing press fully assembled, wedged into a clay chamber 2 meters high, with trays of movable type stacked on shelves cut directly from the earth. Scattered across the floor. Paper cut into leaflet-sized sheets. Ink still slightly wet on the press bed. Someone left in a hurry. The National Museum of the U.S. Army records the 1967 discovery of a single complex covering 2,000 meters that yielded cameras, film, printing presses, and type. What it was producing: propaganda leaflets, forged U.S. safe conduct passes, unit communiques, and training materials. The Viet Cong's information war ran on iron and ink from chambers the Americans couldn't photograph from the air and couldn't reach from the surface. What it was producing: propaganda leaflets, forged U.S. safe conduct passes, unit communiques, training materials. The forged passes are the detail that separates a propaganda shop from a military intelligence operation. A Vietnamese guerrilla with a forged American safe conduct pass could move through checkpoints with documents that looked exactly like the ones the Americans printed. The difference, at a checkpoint, between surviving and not surviving could come down to whether the men running the press underground had done good work that week. This was the infrastructure behind the message. The infrastructure behind the strategy was in the next room. On January 18, 1967, tunnel rats from the 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry, 25th Infantry Division, working during Operation Cedar Falls, entered what appeared to be a standard tunnel junction in the Cu Chi district. What they found was the Viet Cong district headquarters, a complex of rooms containing 500,000 documents. The National Museum of the U.S. Army records the find as including plans for a foiled assassination attempt against Defense Secretary Robert McNamara. They had found the room where the war was being run. Somewhere deeper in the tunnel network that year, a different rat found something else. The National Museum of the U.S. Army records it in its tunnel rat collection, a missing American M48 tank, buried underground, rewired with batteries, lights, and a radio, still operational. The Viet Cong were using a stolen U.S. tank as a command post. The 491,553 pages of documents from Cedar Falls went to intelligence analysis. Months of reading. Some of the material dated back years. The M48 tank went eventually to a museum. The generals who had planned from both had already moved deeper into the network before the infantry arrived. The room was empty. The work was not. The generals planned below. The fighters needed to believe the plan was worth following. Christmas 1966. At Cu Chi Base on the surface, Bob Hope was performing. Lights, sound equipment, a stage, tens of thousands of American soldiers. The show they will play at Christmas. It was one of the best attended USO performances of the war. 8 meters below the same ground, in a lantern-lit chamber, a Viet Cong entertainer named Pham Sang was running his own show. Mangold and Pennicate devote a full chapter to him. Chapter 13 of The Tunnels of Cu Chi. His job was comedy. His audience was the fighters living underground, the men who hadn't seen daylight in weeks, whose nerves were tuned to the frequency of a B-52 strike, and whose morale was the one resource the Americans couldn't destroy from the air. 2 performances, one directly above the other, Bob Hope had camera crews and a sound system and an aircraft to take him home. Pham Sang had a lantern. Mangold and Pennicate describe his show as a comedy, an entertainer keeping men alive in the dark by making them laugh. The Americans up top were being entertained to maintain morale before they fought. The VC below were being entertained to maintain morale after months of living underground. Same function, different darkness. Pham Sang worked without a stage, without lighting beyond a lantern, without amplification. He kept them willing to fight. Dr. Vo Hoang Lei's job was to keep them alive to fight again. January 9th, 1967. Cu Chi District. The 128 Infantry is 2 kilometers away and closing. Dr. Vo Hoang Lei has 7 staff. He has approximately 60 wounded in the tunnels around him. He has what he has. A chamber 8 feet high, 1 bare bulb powered by a Honda motorcycle engine. Instruments fashioned from the metal of downed helicopters, and whatever he has been able to keep sterile in a space that is never fully dry. He performs amputations without anesthetic. Mangold and Pennicate document brain surgery completed with a mechanic's drill. Blood is collected during surgery and returned directly to the patient through a length of electric wire tubing, the only transfusion method available underground. The infantry gets to within 2 kilometers. They do not find the hospital. Over the course of the day, Dr. Lei's team evacuates 54 of the 60 wounded through tunnel passages the Americans don't know about. 6 gravely wounded are left when they have to stop. 1 ton of medicine goes with the evacuees. Dr. Lei will continue operating underground until the end of the war. He becomes Colonel Vo Hoang Lei, Deputy Director of Military Hospital 7A in Ho Chi Minh City. He dies on May 13, 2018. Alan Hawke, writing in Vietnam Magazine in 2002, quotes him, "We managed to do blood transfusion by returning his own blood to the patient. And then, our school was everywhere in the tunnels, beside a patient's bed. He trained new surgeons in a tunnel on patients who were already on the table. Operation Cedar Falls destroyed 400 tunnels, 1,100 bunkers, 500 structures. The U.S. Army captured 3,700 tons of rice and 491,550. 3 pages of documents, including, as we said, plans for an attempt on a cabinet secretary's life. Within a year, every tunnel was rebuilt. The Cu Chi Tunnel Complex is a memorial park today. You can tour reconstructed sections of it. The entrance holes are enlarged so tourists can fit through. They were not enlarged for the tunnel rats. If your father, uncle, or brother was a tunnel rat, or if he ever spoke about what he found down there, leave his name and unit in the comments. The men who went into the dark deserve to be remembered by name.